Masechet Hagigah Daf Kaf Gimel. We're going to be dealing with three of the items on the list of the Mishnah, which was listing ways in which kodesh is more severe than terumah, in ways that we have to be careful that it does not become tameh. We're going to do the third item on the list, and the sixth, and then the seventh. The third item on the list was that one may not carry two items together. If you're carrying kodesh in one hand, that has to remain tahor. On the other hand, you're carrying something that was tameh midras. Midras means something that became a rishon letumah because a zav, for example, sat on it. This only applies to something that people generally sit on or put their weight on, like shoes, like chairs, like cushions. If a zav sits on it, even without touching it, turns it into a rishon latumah, and a rishon latumah can make food tameh, although a rishon latumah cannot make people and vessels tameh. So therefore, this person who in one hand is carrying something that is tameh rishon latumah, even if he's touching it, will not make the person, his body, tameh. So he can have it in one hand or carry it in something, and on the other hand, or somewhere else on his body, on his head, whatever, he's carrying something that is kodesh, food. It's in a separate container, and even though he's careful to make sure they don't touch, it's not permitted. For terumah, it is permitted. Terumah also, you have to be careful it doesn't become tameh, but over there, we trust the person will be able to keep the terumah in one vessel, separated from the item that is tameh midras, so that the sandal or cushion that he's holding will not come into contact with the food that is terumah. So now we ask, kodesh my tama la, how come we prohibit holding these two items together regarding kodesh? Soon we'll ask, why is it permitted regarding terumah? So why not? Because there was an actual case that once happened. A person was carrying a jug of wine that was sanctified. It was donated to be used as a sacrifice in the Bet HaMikdash, and he was bringing it from one place to another. And as he's walking, a strap of his sandal broke. So he picks up the strap and he wants to hold on to it. Later on he'll fix his sandal, and he takes it and puts it on top of the barrel. So a convenient spot. But nafla lavir hechavit, the strap was dangling down and went into the airspace of the barrel. You see, it doesn't even have to touch the food itself. If it enters into the airspace, then already everything in it becomes tameh v'nitmet. Once they heard that story, so then the rabbis made a decree. This is something that can happen again, and therefore someone who is carrying something that's tameh midras, if he's carrying a terumah on the other hand, that's okay. But if he's holding kodesh on the other hand, this case was talking about kodesh, therefore it's prohibited because we don't want this to happen again. All right, so now we understand that this is because of an actual story that happened. But then, if you're worried about people, dropping something or whatever, and then combining and touching the midras tumah with the food, well, that's an equal problem for terumah. Why aren't you worried about terumah? And prohibited there as well. And the answer is Hamaneh Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavyahi Damar lo asru ela beyardenu b'sfinach maseh shehaya. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya, he held the opinion that when we come and make a gezerah because of an event that actually happened, we only make the gezerah in the exact same scenario as what happened, even if there's another scenario that's equally likely. To give an analogy, a lot of times you have an intersection, a stop sign. And sometimes if there's an accident at that intersection, then the city will decide to put a stoplight there on that intersection. Even though on the next block is an equally busy intersection and just as likely that an accident can happen there, they don't go ahead because what are you going to do? Put lights on every intersection? So they only put it on the intersection where it actually happened and not the one that is equally likely to happen, just because that's the way they do it. So that's a Hananiah. We're all going to localize, try to minimize the gezerah to the exact case, even though logically you can apply it to another case, and that is why this case that happened to be kodesh. If it happened to be terumah, they would have made a gezerah on terumah, but it wasn't. So the gezerah is only on kodesh. You can't carry with an item that's tameh, but terumah is okay. Now, this rule of Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya that we limit the gezerah only to the specifics of the actual case that had a problem, we learned that from another story, completely different story altogether, but interesting in and of itself, where he said we only make a gezerah regarding the Jordan River and a boat, as it happened. Well, now what are we talking about? Mahi, what happened there? Ditanya lo yisa adam mechatat. A person, if you're transferring para aduma ashes or para aduma water that was mixed with the ashes, and it's manufactured in Jerusalem, that's where you burn the para and all that, but then you may want to carry the para aduma ashes or water outside so that you can go sprinkle it and purify people from corpse impurity somewhere else. And so maybe they live on the other side of the Jordan. Well, you cannot, when you're transferring, you have to be really careful because it's very precious, and this para aduma ashes cannot become tameh. So there's a rule. You cannot transfer it over the Jordan in a boat. And you also cannot stand on one side of a river and throw it to the other side. And don't let it just float, put it on a rowboat, flotation device, and then push it along. And you should not carry it while riding an animal or riding on your friend's shoulders. Only you have to be walking with your feet on the ground. That's the safest way. And all these other ways, you never know what's going to happen on the way. It's kind of out of your hands, and you may encounter some tum'ah along the way. Well, what if you do want to get it over some kind of body of water? You can do it over a bridge, because even though the bridge is over water, your feet are on solid ground while you're on the bridge, and so you're in full control. So that's a proper way. This is like, transferring delicate substances, right? There are rules about that. Even now, you have to do it safely. Okay, this is true regarding the Jordan River and any other river that you're going to transfer it. That is all Tanakama. So this is a general rule regarding all bodies of water, that you cannot transfer it unless you're actually walking with your feet on some solid ground. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya but Rabbi Hananiah is much more lenient, and he says the only gezerah is regarding the Jordan River, and only if it's on a boat. Any other way is permitted. If a different river, you can use a boat, and even the Jordan River, if you want to throw it over, that's okay, because of the actual story that once happened. What story? One time there was a person who was transferring the water of para aduma and the ashes over the Jordan in a boat. And somewhere along the way, they saw that there was a piece of a human corpse in the floor of the boat. And that will cause tent impurity, even if the boat is not covered. Anytime a person or something goes over that area where that piece of a corpse was, it will cause tum'ah. And therefore, someone walked over it while holding these ashes, and those ashes became tameh, and then they were not usable. And so when that happened, they said, new rule, we don't want this to ever happen again. A person may not transfer para aduma water or ashes over the Jordan in a boat. Okay, and so you see that the story itself happened over the Jordan in a boat, And while the other sages said, well, this is a problem that can happen anywhere. So it makes sense to say the gezerah, no matter what river and no matter what type of transfer, all prohibited. The only thing that you're allowed to do is walk with your feet on solid ground. A bridge is okay. But Rabbi Hananiah in that case said, no, we limit the gezerah only to one case. And so this answers the question that we had. Right? Why not Terumah? Oh, it must be that our Mishnah that makes a distinction between kodesh and Terumah must be following the methodology of Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya, who, just like in the case of the boat over there, limited it. So to here, this guy whose sandal strap broke happened to be carrying kodesh. So we only say kodesh, one may not transfer while holding something else. While holding midras tumah, but terumah, that's okay. All right, so that solves that. We're going to end the section with 3 questions, although only one will be answered. Ibaya lehu sandal tameh. Sandal tahor mahu. We know, we just established that if it's a tameh sandal, then you can't be holding that together with kodesh because it's tameh. But what about if the sandal is actually tahor? Would you say we make a gezerah that this, although this sandal is tahor, that case happened where may lead to me one day carrying a tameh sandal, like that case was, and prohibit even that? Should we extend the gezerah that far? We don't know. Chavit petucha, chavit situma mahu. It makes sense that you should not carry something if the barrel is open. You see, in that case, the barrel must have been open. That's how the strap fell into the barrel. But what if the barrel is sealed and then there's no way that something will fall in? So should we make a gezerah in that case, or is that case okay? So not clear, is it more, it's similar to the case that happened, but not exactly to the case that happened. How far do we stretch it? And last question, avad v'nasa mahu. What if bidi avad? I know you told me I shouldn't. What if bidi avad, I did carry an impure sandal or item like that along while I carried also kodesh, but the whole way they didn't touch. So I violated this gezerah d'Rabbanan. What is the law regarding the actual kodesh? 2 opinions. You violated and you did it, so it's tameh d'Rabbanan. Or yes, nevertheless, the rabbis have to have consequences for violating it. And in fact, they didn't touch, so there's no tumah here. So the rabbi is giving you a good idea. Keep them separate. If you did it, you violated a d'Rabbanan gezerah, but the food itself is still tahor. And that concludes the first discussion. All right, the next discussion is about a vessel that was completed in purity, meaning during a manufacture of an item, it cannot become tameh because it's not a vessel yet, right? While I'm making a pottery and it's still soft and all not formed, so it's not a vessel yet, it's not usable yet. So even if something tameh comes and touches it, it's okay, not a vessel. Once I complete it, right? I bake it in the oven and it's ready, then only then is susceptible to impurity. So what if I just finished it, and as I'm finishing it, I make sure there's nothing tameh anywhere here. Can I use that item? The Mishnah says for Terumah, it's okay. For Kodesh, no, you got to go ahead and dip it in the mikveh. All right, let's see. The gamrin hu man. Now, a question is, who was there when the vessel was completed? If it was a chaver, right, one of the group that commits themselves to a high level of care regarding Tumah and Tahara, if he was there, so why shouldn't he tevilah? He made sure that as it came finished off the assembly line, nothing tameh came in contact with it, so it should be not required tevilah. You should be able to use it even for kodesh. So maybe it was an amaris that completed, and he's not careful, and that's why. Well, in that case, nigmarin betahara kari lehu. Would you call that a case that it was completed in a state of tahara? Amehaaretz are not careful by definition, and so it was while it was processed. Fine, anyone could be there. But at the completion, the case was kelim hanigmarim betahara. So that's the opposite of an amaretz watching it. Amaretz is not watching it; he's causing it tumah. So of course you'd have to do tevilah. You'd have to do that for anything, terumah too. Amar Rabba bar Shela, Amar Rav Matana, Amar Shemuel. Remember this. We're going to quote this entire thing just in a few minutes and applying it to a slightly different case. Okay, but anyway, he says, Shemuel said the answer, Le'olam de gamrinu chaver, mishum sinora de ha'aretz. In fact, we'll go back to the original case. It is a chaver that was there during the time of completion, and yes, he was careful to make sure that there was no tumah around and as it came off the assembly line. Nevertheless, even he would have to worry about the spittle, the saliva of an amaretz that might have fallen on it beforehand. And so that's what the beforehand is what we're about to clarify. Tinfal emat. When exactly did some amaretz, maybe he was passing by and spit and fell on it? If he spit upon it before it was finished, it was not a vessel yet. And if it's not a vessel, it doesn't matter. A dead body can fall on it and it would be okay. Cannot contract tumah before it's finished. So is it did the spit of amaretz fall on it after it was completed? But the chaver is there, and he's there making sure, and he would notice if someone came and spit upon it. So we know that didn't happen. The answer is in fact, perhaps during somewhere along the assembly line, there was an amaretz and he spit on it for whatever reason, and it landed there. And that's okay. It's still tahor at that point because it's not a vessel yet. But it could be that it processes relatively quickly and that saliva will remain on the vessel and remain wet. If it's dried up, it doesn't matter. It remain wet after it's completed, when it finishes the assembly line. In that case, the chaver will not notice it because it happened way before he was on guard. But it is actually still there. And once it's completed, and now that saliva touches it, it can become tameh. And that is the case that we are worried about. This is why even a vessel that's completed betahara with a chaver watching it, if it's kodesh, we worry that perhaps there was saliva on it from beforehand, and that's why we prohibit it in a case of kodesh. So completed by chaver, but worried about saliva. That's what we clarified. Okay, the next thing is going to be a bit complex, but really interesting, getting back into Sadducean polemics. We are going to infer that this type of vessel does require immersion in a mikveh, but the Mishnah didn't say anything about waiting for the sun to set. You see, if it's a very low-level tumah, just a rabbanan, then put it in the mikveh and that's it. On the other hand, higher-level tumah, like if something was touched by a sheretz, then you have to put in the mikveh anytime during the day, and you have to wait till it gets dark out in order for it to be tahor for most reasons. And so in this case, this impurity of this vessel that was completed and the chaver was watching it, the Mishnah just says you have to wait till it gets dipped. Didn't say anything about the setting of the sun. So it seems we could infer that you don't have to wait for setting of the sun, and then you could use it immediately for terumah, for kodesh even. All right, we're going to say that this inference makes sense for it to be Yehoshua, but not for it to be Eliezer. And let's see why. In the end, we're going to conclude that, in fact, that I will say it works for the be Eliezer also. He will agree with our Mishnah with this inference from the Mishnah. All right, let's see how where the logic takes us. So tivila'in ha'arev shemesh ala. The Mishnah says that this vessel that was completed in purity with the chaver watching, it does require immersion in the mikveh, but does not require the setting of the sun. Good. Matnitin de la Rabbi Eliezer. This Mishnah seems to not follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Ideally, we want a Mishnah to follow everyone, right? Even though Rabbi Eliezer is a minority opinion and all that, but we'd prefer. So this is actually a challenge. So let's first prove that it doesn't how it doesn't follow Rabbi Eliezer. Ditnan. Mishnah and Masechet Para. Shefoferet shechatacha lechatat. If I took a reed and I'm cutting it to make a tube, this tube I'm going to use to store para aduma ashes. So it's got to be made, it's got to be pure. Rabbi Eliezer omer yitbol miyad. Rabbi Yehoshua omer yitameh ve'achar kach yitbol. Rabbi Eliezer says, although it's new, I have to go put it in a mikveh immediately. Rabbi Yehoshua goes an interesting step further and says, after I manufacture it, I have to make it tameh, make a dead mouse touch it, and then put it into the mikveh. This is very strange, right? Why exactly are we making it tameh and then making it tahor again? Why not just leave it tahor? To understand this, we have to understand something about para aduma polemics. As a Mishnah that we're going to quote in a minute, I'm going to quote it now because we need to know this as background. Mishnah Masechet Para says, מטמאין היו את הכהן השורף את הפרה להוציא מליבן של סדוקים שהיו אומרים במעורבי שמש הייתה נעשית. That when they would prepare para aduma, they would take the kohen whose job it was going to be to burn the para, and they would make him tameh on purpose, make him touch a dead mouse, and then they would have him go to the mikveh during the day and perform the burning before it got dark. Why would they do that? Well, because this was a machloket between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees were more stringent, as they usually are, and they said that when you're preparing para aduma, all the people in Kohanim involved have to be 100% tahor, meaning they have to have gone to the mikveh and wait till sunset, till it got dark, to be tahor. Best if they never came into contact with tumah that whole day, even the few days before. And if they did come into contact with tumah that day and they went to the mikveh, not good enough because they're only like 90% of the way. They're still missing getting dark. Right. For other laws, as you know, everyone agrees it has to wait till dark. Like for a kohen to eat terumah, if a kohen became tameh and goes to the mikveh, he cannot eat terumah yet until it gets dark. We know that from the very first Mishnah Berachot, right? You can start saying Shema at night at the same time that the Kohanim begin eating terumah, which is after nightfall. Okay, so the Sadukim say what the law that we would expect for para aduma. That's a really serious thing. You want to wait till nightfall. But the Pharisees and following them, the rabbis said not so. That the people, the Kohanim preparing the para aduma, it's sufficient if they went to the mikveh and do it even before sunset. It was a major kula that they believed and they derive elsewhere. Fine. Now, when they're preparing para aduma, it would have been simple to make everyone happy. Take a kohen who's 100% tahor, didn't become tameh that whole day or yesterday or the day before, and have him perform, and then everyone would be happy. Everyone, Sadducees and Pharisees, could use this. It's like if you're making a wedding and you get the highest level of kashrut so that everyone can eat no matter what their personal preferences are. And so you could have made everybody happy. But the nature of polemics then was such that these two groups were really at each other's throat. A lot of politics and a lot of tension there. And so the Pharisees decided they were going to create a situation where the Sadducees would not be able to participate. And so they took this kohen, made him tameh, made him go to the mikveh, and had him burn the para aduma before sunset, just to show the Sadducees that it's this law that shemesh hayta na'aset, it was done by someone who the Sadducees said it had to be done by someone for whom the sun has set. They wanted to show the Sadducees it doesn't have to be. It can be done by a tivul yom. Tivul yom is the category of someone who went to the mikveh during the day and sunset has not come. And so that when they do this in public, everybody will see, oh, para aduma, look what they're doing before sunset. I guess it's allowed before sunset. And that would teach everyone that the Pharisees, this is the halacha, and the Sadducean halacha is wrong. All right, so that's the background. So therefore, there was basically a law that not only the Kohen Gadol, all the vessels that you used, everything would make it tameh, and you have to make it tameh first, and put it in the mikveh and do it before sunset. You have to do that. Otherwise, it won't show the Sadducees that they are wrong. Okay, so now we're ready to go back here. This item, this tube that they're using to carry the ashes of the paraduma, it's new. And so it would be easy to make it 100% tahor, but we have to have some way of making it tameh enough that it would require the sun to set upon it. And then we'll put it in mikveh and use it before sunset. Okay, so that's why the Yehoshua here says, make it tameh and then do tevilah for this very reason. According to the Eliezer, he agrees that you have to do something like this. So he says, Yitbol miyad, we can infer from here that according to the Eliezer, after it comes off the manufacturing line, it's already tameh, a high level, it's already tameh enough that you will require immersion and sunset. And that's why he just says, do tevilah, because it already requires sunset. And that's why this is enough of a polemic against them. So you see, according to the Eliezer, he must disagree that it needs tevilah, but does not require Hadev Shemesh. He must think that in this case of something that came off the finishing line, even though the Chaver is watching it, does require Hadev Shemesh. Therefore, it's already high level Tumah, and therefore it's already something that the Sadducees would say, no, you can't use that. And so you just do tevilah. The Yehoshua says, no, this by itself is not enough, because this only requires immersion, not sunset. And that's why the Yehoshua says you have to make it more tameh before you immerse it. All right, that's the logic that we're going to see. Well, let's see how it plays out in the text. When we analyzed this, we wondered, man, so the person preparing this reed little cup, who is doing it? If it's a chaver doing it, why would you need tevilah? For example, according to the Eliezer, says you have to dip it right away. Why would you dip it if a chaver is there and he's watching it? If it's a ma'aretz that's preparing it, then according to the Yehoshua, why would you need to make it more tameh and do tevilah? It's already impure, being handled by an amaretz. And so that would be a sufficient protest against the Sadducees. This is the same statement we saw before. It's just a second application of the same reasoning. In fact, it has to be that it was a chaver. Okay, and we're worried, even though the chaver is watching at the end of the process, maybe beforehand, some saliva of amaretz was placed on it. When it fell on it, when was that? When did the amaretz? When could he have spit upon it? If it was before it was cut, well, it wasn't a vessel yet, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't make it tameh. If it's after it was cut, then that's okay, because the chaver is watching it. And we answer as before that it could be that the amad is passed by while it's being manufactured and spit on it. The chaver wasn't watching at that point, but it didn't matter because it was not a vessel. But maybe it remained on it and remained wet, remain moist even after it was done, and therefore that will cause it to become tameh, and the chaver wouldn't be able to notice that, and so that's what we are worried about. Okay, so now that we established the case, bishlama Yehoshua, so according to the Yehoshua, this makes sense why he requires it to become tameh again. According to the Yehoshua, even though I'm worried about this spittle falling on it during the processing and all that, nevertheless, the Yehoshua up here still requires that one go ahead and make it tameh again. So why would that be? Why would you have to make it tameh again to show the Sadducees? It must be that he agrees with this inference that In a regular processing, it requires only tevilah and not hadif shemesh. In other words, this worry about some spittle falling it on along the way and the chaver not noticing it at the end is just a low-level derabanan. And so because we want to be careful of that, so fine, we say don't do that. If you do it with kodesh, it requires tevilah. So it's fine, but that's a low level and doesn't require hadif shemesh. Therefore, it's not a sufficient amount of tum'ah to stick it to the Sadducees, and that's what Rabbi Yehoshua would say, that you have to go and make it more tameh, make it touch a dead mouse, and that way it will require tevilah. So that's how we see that Rabbi Yehoshua, by requiring this extra step, thinks that without that extra step, hadef shemesh is not required for this gezerah. Fine. Now, what about Bishlama Rabbi Yehoshua, Hanudika Hekada Sadukin, Ditnan, and now just going to quote the background that I mentioned already. Ditnan Betamin Hayu et Kohen Asorev Tapara, Lo Simi Liban Shel Sadukim Sheyomrim, Bemora Beshemesh Haita Na'asit. That would make the Kohen Tameh in order to uproot from the minds of the Sadukim, because they would say that it has to be done by someone for whom night has fallen, and so we make it Tameh, do it before nightfall. Good. That's all. Shows that Rabbi Yehoshua agrees that in the law of the Mishnah, all only requires immersion, not nightfall. If he would say that in a regular case of finishing an object on the assembly line, that would require ha'arev shemesh, they have to wait till nightfall too, well then that by itself would be tameh and a sufficient sign, opposition, recognition of opposition to the Sadukim. But if he does not think that you need hadef shemesh in general, then there's no hekera here. And because Rabbi Eliezer set up above that, you do not have to make it more tameh, right? You just comes off the assembly line. He assumes it's already tameh, hadef shemesh, and that's why he says you could just put it in the mikveh as is, right there, because coming off the assembly line, it's already a high level of tum'ah, and that's why you don't have to make it more tameh, like Rabbi Yehoshua says. Okay, so that means, according to Rabbi Eliezer, in fact, it requires hadef shemesh, and he would not agree with this inference that we said here, tevilah in hadef shemesh la. Rabbi Eliezer would say, no, I disagree with them in this Mishnah, and it requires hadef shemesh too, right? And that's why it's sufficient to be tovel, and not make it any more tameh to polemicize against the Sadducees. So that's our conclusion so far, which is actually a question, because we prefer the Mishnah to be according to everybody. And so Rav comes to the rescue. Amar Rav, Asauha kitme sheres. In fact, when this comes off the assembly line, it is as if it's a tameh tum'at sheretz, and that's why it does not require to make it. It does not require to make it tameh again. Rav is explaining that according to Rabbi Eliezer, in a regular case of completing a vessel betahara, a regular vessel, it would get the status of a low level, a sheni la tum'ah. And so that's okay in a regular case. In the case where we're going to use the vessel for para aduma, however, he's explaining that the rabbis assign it a category similar to Tum'at Sheretz. Tum'at Sheretz is Ava Tum'ah, and something that touches is a Rishon. So therefore, they treat this thing as if it's a Rishon La Tum'ah that can a bigger capacity for most reasons. However, even though a Tum'at Sheretz normally would require nightfall, in this case, they don't require nightfall. So it's like a category of Tum'ah Sheretz, not actual Tum'ah Sheretz. And therefore, to be able as it can be reconciled with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that you don't have to wait till nightfall. And in this case, you would not actually have to wait till nightfall. But by making it a Rishon L'Tumah, as if it were Tum'ah Sheretz, that's enough of a recognition that would be against the Sadducees, because everybody will know, oh, look, they're treating it like a Tumah Sheretz in the way that it impacts Tumah onto other things. And therefore, normally you would wait till sunset, and by dipping it right away, and not waiting till sunset, it shows that the Sadducees are wrong. And that's why, because we give it this high level of Tumah, we don't need to add another level of Tumah like Rabbi Yehoshua does. So in fact, Rabbi Eliezer can be the same, right? So in summary, Mishnah says that something that comes off the assembly line, washed by a chaver, does not need to wait till nightfall, just tevilah is allowed. And while Rabbi Yehoshua says, this is a low level. So if you're going to use it for paraduma, you got to make it tameh again and then dip it. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you don't have to. If you're going to use it for paraduma, we give it a higher status of tumah, even though we don't require nightfall. Good. Ela me'ata lo titame adam. Wait, if you give it this higher level of Tumah Sheretz, although it's a higher level, still it's not a very high level, because even Tumah Sheretz will only be a rishon letumah, and a rishon letumah can only make food tameh, not a person. And so therefore should not make a person tameh. Allah matanya chotcha u'matpila ta'un tevilah. That the person who is cutting and immersing this tube that you're going to use for para aduma, he has to go to the mikveh himself. Well, why would that be? It means that it is causing tumah to the person. If it's only a rishon tumah, that's not enough. Okay, so change our answer. What I've said, a variation, that the rabbi is going to make this item like it's tamemet. And the tamemet can cause tumah to someone else, another person, because that's avatuma. Wait a second, now you went too far, because if this reed little basket that you made is like as if it touched an actual corpse, then you would have to put paraduma water on it for the third and seventh day and go to the mikveh. And we didn't say any of that. All we says you have to put it in the mikveh. So that's too much. All we said is that the one preparing it has to put it in the mikveh, and that person just requires tevilah. So it doesn't require any 3 and 7 tevilah in hazat shvi'ilah. Or rather, we assign it the category of something that was tamemet, and we jump to as if it's already on the 7th day, as if we did haza'ah. So it still has the power to make people tameh, but it only requires haza'ah. In other words, all this is the Rabbanan, and so when the rabbis come and make a gezerah and say this has a level of tumah, the rabbis can actually choose what level of deoraita, tumah, they are going to associate with it on a Rabbanan level, right? The rabbinic decrees fit into biblical categories, and so they can even pick a category that's in the middle, that's in the process of becoming tahor, and this would suffice to explain all the braitot of the exact level. Okay, now a really interesting question. We have a rule that the rabbis never made any innovations with regard to para aduma. This is a very interesting braita, because if you look at Masechet Para, you see that there are, in fact, a lot of innovations that are huge stringencies. The reason why the rabbis made a lot of stringencies, like you have to bring up a child who's born on a platform, so never become tameh, and wait till that child grows up till they're like 11 years old, and they go and draw the water, right? A lot of stringencies that are not in the Torah. Well, the rabbis made those stringencies because they're so lenient regarding the tivul yom, who's allowed to prepare the paraduma before sunset. They didn't want people to take the whole thing lightly, and so they added stringencies. Okay, now that they added stringencies, people were saying, hey, these are all added stringencies. So then the Braita says, no, the rabbis never added anything regarding the laws of para. All right, but we see that there is an added thing, and this is example of we just showed you one of them, that we made this reed basket as if it was tameh met on the 7th day of its purification. So isn't that a new law? Amar Abaye shelo amru kordom mitameh moshav kidatanya. No, Abaye says only. Yes, the rabbis made new gezerot. It's true. What this statement means is that they did not make any new entire categories or apply a category to something that doesn't fit. For example, kordom, a spade. They would never say that a spade can become tumat moshav. Tumat moshav is something that only a zav or zavaf, they sit on it, can become tameh. But that type of tumah can only apply to something that is made for sitting on or putting your weight on. And a spade is not that, right? We have to call a spade, and not a chair. Kidetanya, vayoshev ala keli, yachol kafas se'av yashav aleha. So because the pasuk says someone who sits on an object where the zav sits, that will become tameh. Now, what if I turn over a vessel? I turn over a bucket or a milk crate, and I want to sit on the milk crate. And the zav sits on it? Does it become tameh, tumat zav, because he's sitting on it? No. The pasuk says, only someone who sits on a vessel that is sat upon, meaning only a sitting vessel, something that's made for sitting. That the word yitma is not actually in the pasuk, but it's implied. Then you have to purify everything. Only if it's something made for sitting, misha miyuchad lishiva. Whereas if you take a bucket and turn it over and sit on it, if the workers come along and says, "Oh, we need the bucket," they say, "Get up, we need the bucket to work." It's a work implement. If it was a chair, they wouldn't say, "Get up, I need a chair for something else." And so therefore, that's the same with the spade. The rabbis will never, cannot, do not say that something that, like a spade, that cannot enter the category of tumat moshav, that they'll assign it tumat moshav. They wouldn't do that because it can never be. However, something that is within the realm of possibility of becoming tameh to that level, and so this little reed basket could theoretically become tameh met and could be purified for the third day and seventh day and waiting for immersion. So since the category can apply, the rabbis do here say that we are going to make it as if it's tameh tumah d'Rabbanan according to that level of tum'ah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.